Gateway Bank was very significant to us on a number of levels. He opened his first business a few blocks away from Gateway on Union Boulevard. And at that time in the 60s when Gateway was created, it was a symbol to the community of African American empowerment, of financial investment, and for people to have pride and dignity in their community. And it remained that way all the way up until its closing. So his involvement and his work really was a testimony not only to him, but all of the other co-founders and the investors and supporters of the bank the entire time that it was open.
Did you personally spend much time there growing up?
Absolutely. I was an account holder at Gateway and enjoyed being a customer for many, many years.
What about prior to that? What about your youth?
I definitely was there as a youth as well. My cousin Lisa took me there on a number of occasions, and it was a place where you could go and feel some pride and dignity about African American advancement in St. Louis.
What was the atmosphere like as a kid?
It was a very open and welcoming environment, even for someone such as myself, who, of course, as a child did not have an account, but it was some place that you could go, and people were very friendly, they were very courteous, they were very kind, and on top of that, it was some place that was very inspiring because you could see African Americans in charge of a major institution in the community.
And I guess that's what I'm getting to. Was there a sense that there was something special going on there?
Oh, absolutely. With this being the only black-owned bank in the state of Missouri, it was definitely a sense of pride and dignity that we all had in terms of going there, meeting with the staff, meeting with the customers, the environment in the lobby, just seeing so many people come through the doors. You would see doctors, lawyers, teachers, educators, principals, so many leaders in the community who had pride and put all of their own personal financial investments in the bank as well.
And what about later? That was your youth, but later you mentioned working there later on. Did that feeling, did that sense change as you grew up and became an adult? And
No, not at all. I enjoyed being a personal customer of the bank, and that same feeling of pride and dignity remained the entire time that I was a customer.
Going back to the days when you were a kid and spent some time there, talk to me about the individuals that you met there and who worked there.
Donnell Reed, Aaron Phillips, Tab Buford, and so many others. It was really something significant when you would see the president of Gateway come downstairs into the lobby to meet and greet the customers and talk to people and make sure that he interacted with the staff and the community. So it was something that we took great pride in.
Sounds like a kind of a gathering place, if you will.
It was. It was almost like a cocktail party, especially on Friday afternoons when people would come by with their paychecks and before the bank closed. It was a great welcoming environment, and one that people got a chance to interact with each other and catch up with old friends.
All right, Mr. McMillan, how did you feel when you heard the bank was closing?
Well, obviously the banking industry had been through quite a lot in 2008, 2009, and to actually have a small community bank such as Gateway that had been so supportive of so many people who really in many cases might not have had the chance to get a loan from anyone else, you knew that the bank had some potential issues when the entire industry was in trouble. And finding out that it eventually was going to close, of course, was very, very disappointing because not only would the community lose a significant asset, all of the investors lost their funds, of course, and it was sad because you lost an institution that was providing people that might not have had a chance to interact with a bank the opportunity to do so.
Had you heard of St. Louis Community Credit Union?
Of course. St. Louis Community Credit Union has an excellent reputation. They're very involved in the community. They too work to make sure that people that normally don't have access to loans and economic opportunity get that opportunity on a regular basis.
That sounds kind of like-minded.
It's a perfect segue from Gateway National Bank to the credit union because they have the same mission. They serve most of the same people. The credit union obviously has a bigger scope because they have more locations and more capacity. But when you look at their core mission, it is a perfect combination, and it's a perfect segue into the future for the credit union to open this new branch and name it a Gateway branch.
That must be a bit reassuring to you.
Oh, absolutely. What it does is it keeps a historic, iconic institution alive in the form of the name right there at that location and in that particular community that, quite frankly, is underbanked.
The credit union has decided to pay tribute to Gateway Bank, as you said, by having its newest location bear the Gateway name. What do you think about that?
Oh, I'm excited about that. I'm very grateful to the credit union. They continue to impress me with all of their commitment to the community, their desire to give back. We at the Urban League partner with them on our Back to School program with the St. Louis Public Schools and a number of other different financial literacy and empowerment initiatives throughout the region.
Mr. McMillan, what does St. Louis Community Credit Union's presence mean to the community with its investment in Gateway Bank?
Well, what it does is it takes an area that you now have an abandoned building and you take and invest millions of dollars in the facility. You create jobs and then you give economic opportunity to the residents in that area that might not have the accessibility or the transportation to get to other parts of town to actually have the banking opportunities that they need to be successful in their own lives. So them investing right there is very significant and will really be a testimony not only to the history of Gateway Bank, but also what the credit union is doing going forward.
All right, Mr. Mines, now you started out at Gateway as a teller, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, when?
1968.
See? And you went on to become, you had bigger and better job titles.
Well, I became head teller probably about 2 years after that, and then became a loan officer, and my last position was collection manager for the bank.
And you started when?
1968.
And how long was your tenure there?
About 7 years.
Okay. So you progressed steadily during that time?
Yes, I did.
Okay. How do you account for that, Mr. Mines?
Well, it didn't hurt that the executive vice president of the bank was a fraternity brother, but more importantly, I had a very good interview with the gentleman who was in charge of the loan department at the time that I applied for a loan. And he asked me if I would consider a job at the bank, and at that time I said yes. And I had an interview with the executive vice president, Island Owen Funderburg. Took an exam that very day, and I was hired.
Why did you apply there initially?
I wanted to borrow money to go to school. I had just completed 3 years of service in the U.S. Army. I was 20 years of age when I completed the service, and I needed money for college. Even though I was going to apply for the GI loan, still needed money for college. So I applied for a loan at the bank.
Well, Mr. Mines, what are some of your memories about your experience at Gateway Bank? Do you have a particular story or two that you can share with us?
Probably the most important experience I had was when I was a loan officer. That's when I got a chance to really help people to get money for their businesses as well as their personal use. And one story in particular was a business, was a cleaning business. And I found out that in the months, of course, of the fall and winter, that was the best time for a cleaning business, and in the summer and the spring it was not. So I set up what is called a demand loan that allowed the owner to borrow money, pay the principal and the interest during the fall and winter, and pay just the interest during the summer. And that was kind of revolutionary for that type of arrangement, because in the past, most business men and women had to pay loans on an installment basis. But this is where they had a lot of flexibility, so I was very proud of that.
Who gave you that flexibility?
Island Owen Funderburg. He was a gentleman that believed in banking within the African American community. He came from North Carolina, had a lot of experience in banking operations, and he allowed us to do whatever we wanted to do within the scope of the bank's operation. Take any task that you want and work it to the best of your ability.
And what kind of reaction did you get from customers when they learned that you could afford them something like that?
It was fantastic, unbelievable. Even 40 plus years later, I still see people in the community that come to me and thank me for giving them their first loan and helping them for financial situations. So it's very gratifying.
I was just going to say that. That must be very gratifying.
It is very gratifying.
All this time later.
All this time later.
We're in a new era now.
To a degree. To a degree. You know, Gateway Bank was started in 1965. because it was very difficult for African Americans to get loans from banks. And so the founders started the bank on that premise that they would be able to make loans to individuals and in business and also for consumer purchases. But
Mr.
here,
Martin?
but here in 2015, we have the same problem. So 50 years later, we still, as African Americans, have the same problem getting loans from banking.
Interesting.
Yeah, it really is. It's unfortunate, to be quite frank with you.
Are we repeating history?
Yes, we are. Unfortunately, if we don't know our history, we repeat it. And that's one of the problems that I see today in the marketplace. We're still in St. Louis, one of the most unbanked communities for African Americans in the country. And a lot of it has to do with the way the banking structure was set up in St. Louis and can still operates today.
Does that have the attention of people here?
To a degree. Some of the organizations are trying to do something about it, but for the most part, the non-traditional financial places, such as your cashing places, payday loans, they're making a lot of money because people are not aware of it.
Well, we touched upon this, Mr. Mines. Well, what was personally for you of greatest importance regarding Bank Gateway and its role in the community here?
Financial literacy. It was then and it's also now. Helping people to establish checking and savings accounts, understand the value of loans, understand the value of paying back loans. So financial literacy continues to be a challenge for a lot of people. And I think it's so important today to have that kind of information available to everyone.
Were you surprised when you heard the bank would close?
No, I was not. The assets of Gateway National Bank in 1965, when it first capitalized, was about $65 million. When they closed, many, many years later, it was virtually the same amount. So it had not progressed any. So I wasn't surprised. Disappointed, but not surprised.
That scenario does not work for a bank.
No, it does not. I mean, most banks today make money from fees. They make money from interest. But unfortunately, Gateway National Bank was not a bank that allowed an opportunity to get a lot of fees. And I think the most important point was this. At the time that the banks, the larger banks were beginning to merge and acquire other banks, Gateway National Bank was not one of those banks that they acquired. So they kind of treated them like a stepchild, a family reunion.
Why was Gateway not among those that was considered?
I think because the consumer base was primarily African American, and the majority banks did not want to have anything to do with that community. And to give you a good example, Mound City Bank was less than a half a block, maybe 2 blocks away from Gateway National Bank, and it had a major account with General Motors, which had a plant right on Natural Bridge and Union. And Mound City Bank, which was predominantly white bank, had a demand account for check cashing, which meant that thousands and thousands of dollars every week went to that bank to cash checks. Gateway Bank never got any demand deposits, and that was one of the problems. Gateway Bank received $100,000 for a CD that was advertised in the local African American newspaper, but most people didn't realize that if you have a $100,000 certificate of deposit, you could only lend out 10 or 20% of it based on the Federal Reserve requirements. So it wasn't going to be able to stay around long. Plus, you had to pay interest to the General Motors. So it was a tough situation.
You said you weren't surprised. How did you feel about the news that the bank would close?
Actually, I was disappointed because of the fact that there were some African American men and women who were trying to acquire the bank. They were going around to various potential investors, to try to get them to purchase the charter. And nothing happened. And then the bank was sold to a group of businessmen who used it for predatory lending because they needed the bank charter for that purpose. And so it was not surprising, but very disappointing that it went that way.
Mr. Mines, had you heard of St. Louis Community Credit Union?
I most certainly have.
What are your impressions?
Very good. Top-notch organization. As a matter of fact, I have a personal account there. I stayed with Gateway Bank even after its acquisition by a minority bank from Kansas City area. And when that particular entity decided to close the bank up, and we were visited by people from the St. Louis Community Credit Union, they wanted to transfer accounts over to their institution. and I was fortunate enough to be able to get an account transferred over to them, and I've been very impressed with their efforts to really connect with the African American community in particular.
You said top notch.
Yes.
What is it about St. Louis Community Credit?
Their attention to the needs of the community from a financial literacy standpoint. They're always having classes on financial education. They're providing short-term loans, which is very important, unsecured loans, which is very important, and the community aspect. I mean, the name implies St. Louis Community Credit Union, and that's exactly what it is.
Financial literacy remains a priority for you.
It's a very big priority. As a matter of fact, I think that financial literacy should be taught in kindergarten and progress from there. There are a number of people that have attended secondary education, postgraduate, that still don't have financial literacy. And that's one of the problems we have today.
The credit union has decided to pay tribute, in a sense, to Gateway Bank with its newest location by bearing its name.
Yes.
What do you think of that?
I think it's tremendous. As a matter of fact, I know it's tremendous. I'm in the neighborhood all the time, and I saw the demolition. I'm seeing it take place now, and I've seen the illustration of what the bank is going to look like. So I'm very proud of what the St. Louis Community Credit Union is going to do in that location. There's a lot of goodwill that goes with that, because that's an establishment that's been around for a long time. It's really an anchor in the community. So it's a great move on their part.
And not only building there, but keeping its name in some capacity.
By all means, by all means. You can't ask for any better legacy than someone to continue to carry it on like that.
That's going to mean something to a lot of people.
It's going to mean quite a bit to a number of people. I've always wanted to have some relationship with a financial institution that understood the market that I serve, and they do a tremendous job of that.
Well, Mr. Mines, in light of that, what does St. Louis Community Credit Union's presence mean to the community with its investment in Gateway?
Well, I think number one, they're going to deal with the financial literacy piece. They're also going to start working with the unbanked community because of their programs. It's going to give people a place to go and take care of business and handle their business without having to go all over town. And they actually do make loans to people. And that's very, very important. I'm astounded by the movement of financial institutions away from signature loans that just help people to get from one paycheck to another, but is much needed. That would be a big help to a lot of people. Let me also say this, that having an institution like the Community Credit Union, which I've always been a fan of, I understand what it's all about. It's owned by the customers and the, quote, shareholders, if you will. It takes on a different attitude than, quote, a commercial bank. But because it feels like a commercial bank and acts like a commercial bank, you get the advantages of all of that, and that's very important. So I think they're doing a tremendous job in all aspects of financial wherewithal.
Can you talk to me about the atmosphere of banking for members of the African community, African American community 50 years ago, back in the 60s?
Well, you got to go back further than that. I mean, it was just, that was in the teenage stage. If you go far enough, in 1915, we had credit unions. New Age Federal Savings and Loan came into being because it was impossible for African Americans to get loans by white institutions. So how do you get financing? You have to do it yourself. And so many African Americans began to come together to pool their resources to make it available for African Americans to get loans from from their institutions. I remember if there was an article in 1914 in the newspaper, it showed how individuals in Kinloch, Missouri were paying double the cost. Whites would buy it at one price, sell it twice the price, and finance it for African Americans. They bragged about how, I guess you'd say it was how safe it was because African Americans paid off their debts. So a 50.
And was he what, chairman emeritus by that point?
He was chairman emeritus by that point, yeah.
When was that?
2009. Yeah, so he put his whole heart and soul into Gateway Bank and just was so very committed to the very end.
What do you recall as a child what your father said about this when he was considering this and formulating this and launching this initiative?
Well, you know, I was quite young then, but again, he did speak about the need of you know, Gateway Bank was the only black-owned bank in the state of Missouri. And so again, for those co-founders to be so committed, it was just amazing. And again, he always spoke about the lack of financial institutions and products available to the black community and loans. They needed loans. So therefore, Gateway Bank, it was actually Gateway National Bank at that time. So yeah.
What did he say? Did he talk about those things just in terms of injustice, or there needed to be a solution, or what?
There needed to be a solution and there was an injustice, both. And so I think George Montgomery and Melvin Harrington, I think, began the charter, and they all came together. There was quite a number of local African American businessmen that came together to create Gateway National Bank.
Pioneers.
Exactly. Courageous pioneers, absolutely.
At a time when there was a price to pay.
At a time that there was a price to pay. You know, I think it was in '63 that Jefferson Bank had the sit-in, and so the timing was amazing.
I mean, at a time when there were clearly, all around the country, were consequences for people who didn't like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This was no small undertaking.
Not at all. Not at all. It was historical, as you well know. So.
Were they at risk?
Looking back on history, I would think that may have been at risk, but I don't particularly remember any stories of any negativity or
Any threats or anything
of that sort, no.
Well, Lisa, you put in some time at the bank.
I did. I was employed with Gateway Bank for 14 years, and it was quite an honor to be a part of Gateway Bank and be able to work with my father. Had an amazing staff, fabulous presidents over the years. All of them had the same passion and for serving the community and providing financial education for the community. So I worked in customer service, and I can tell you, I have so many fond memories of Gateway Bank. I think we were the only bank that served coffee and popcorn every day, and we served donuts on the 1st and the 3rd of every month. And so we would have our customers to come in, of course, to handle their finances, but to just come in and just talk. It was like we were an extended family, and it was just amazing. I can remember I was coming to work this morning thinking about some of the stories at Gateway, and one of our customers was a member of the St. Louis Symphony, and every time she would come into the bank, she would bring her violin when she made her transactions at the teller window. Well, this one particular day, and I think this was during the time that Donnell Reed was president, she actually opened up her case and performed in the lobby. I'm saying it's amazing. I mean, how often does that happen? That's what I'm saying. It's just great memories. And to this day, I still have people that will stop me on the street and is like, hey, aren't you Cliff Gates' daughter? And I'm like, yeah. And he said, oh my God, Gateway Bank gave us our first loan for our first home. And I had a young lady stop me the other day, and she said, you know, your dad, well, she said her father passed the bank every day going to work. And she said, your father came out and said, hey, Gateway Bank is starting savings accounts for kids. And I know you have children, and we want the children to come in and start a savings account. And she was one of those children, and she told me that every weekend religiously she would come in and go to the teller window and make her little deposit and get her little receipt. So, you know, it's very cool that after all these years you still hear great stories and stories that you just never knew about. So it's rewarding.
So your father was out on the sidewalk marketing savings.
Absolutely.
Boy.
That's a community bank for you, huh?
You said a lot of the presidents were like-minded, like your father.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I think a lot of them had that same vision and same concern for the community, providing financial services. Wonderful, wonderful presidents that really, really took the bank at heart and did everything that they could during their term for the community. I know Donnell Reed would even have his office on the lobby, and he had like an open door policy so people could always come in and chat with him. You know, think about it. You could just walk in and chat and share a donut with the president of the bank, you know? So that's why I say we were like an extended family in the community.
How did that happen, that those presidents were of a mind, an opinion, an attitude similar to your father's?
It was a blessing, actually. I don't know if that was intentionally how they were intentionally picked or not, but it was wonderful.
Do you think he played a role in that?
My father? I think he did. Yeah, I think the entire board did. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's probably pretty unusual, you know what I mean, to have a string of people, because, you know, you get a new president, the organization goes a different way. Or
No.
whatever, I mean.
We've had consistent presidents that had the utmost concern for the community. So we were very blessed in that aspect.
Well, Lisa, what else sticks out in your mind about your memories, particularly considering that you worked there for 14 years? I mean, you had experience and exposure there as a child, but then was it your first job?
No, that wasn't my first job, but it was one of the most rewarding because, as I said, even today, I still run into some of my old customers, and they talk about how they've never had another banking experience since Gateway that was so rewarding and never felt so personal. You know, never had such a personal relationship with any other bank than the days of Gateway Bank. So it makes you feel good. It makes you feel really good.
How did you feel when you heard it was closing?
Well, needless to say, that was a very sad time, and my father had already passed, and you know, it was just a very sad time that Gateway didn't thrive. You know, that was during a time where there were a lot of bank closures, and but when the people from St. Louis Community Credit Union called me and told me that they were opening a Gateway branch, oh my gosh, I was just elated. I thought that was amazing. And I work with the St. Louis City Treasurer's Office. I'm the director of the Office of Financial Empowerment. And so we have interactions with a lot of the banks and credit unions in the metropolitan area. St. Louis Community Credit Union has sponsored a couple of our initiatives. We've worked with them before. Oh my gosh, they are, I think, just such a perfect fit for that community because they have shown their commitment to the community. They've provided financial literacy programs for our city employees as well as for the public. They really go over and beyond for the community.
And the name?
will be St. Louis Community Credit Union Gateway Branch. Yeah,
What about that?
that's amazing. And I think the co-founders will be just so pleased, or would be so pleased, that their vision and legacy is being carried on. So, yeah.
I mean, that'll mean something to a lot of people, huh?
Oh, absolutely. You know, St. Louis is, or Missouri has one of the highest number of unbanked households. So I think their presence in the community there will make a huge difference. And we're looking forward to that.
Well, Lisa, what does St. Louis Community Credit Union's presence to mean to the community, you know, with its investment in the property and carrying on the name and some of the memorabilia and things of that nature that you're talking about?
What does that mean to me?
Just what does it mean to the community?
Oh, I think they'll be very, very pleased. You know, as I said, we were like a family over there, and it's a great community over there. There are so many families that don't have transportation to go to other financial institutions, and there's so many great families over there that are needing someone to just take a moment and provide financial literacy and guidance. And St. Louis Community Credit Union, as I said, just really goes over and beyond and does their part on the community.
You're not the first person to mention financial literacy, is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it sounds like that is a priority for the credit union and was a priority for Gateway. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely, ongoing. As I said, we have so many unbanked households here in Missouri, and so it's so important to address that issue right now in order for our families to provide better for our community overall and their growth. So, yeah.
Return on your money if you loan it to African Americans, because the banks wouldn't do it, but if you as a white would do it, you could make double on your money. So even that early stage, it showed the importance of the need for institutions such as African Americans established to finance their own. Ellardsville, which is now known as the Ville, when African Americans couldn't get loans, the Ellardsville Corporation formed itself. Individuals pooled their money to make it available to African Americans so they could purchase homes. So predatory lenders have always been there. By steering and making it impossible for African Americans to get loans in certain places, they've made it so you have to buy slum property, and that's the only thing you get financing on, double. And when people found out, when other opportunities became available, they owed more than the property was worth, so they walked off and left them, and that's why we have much decay in many of our communities.
So there were no rules, laws, or regulations in place back then to prevent that?
No, it's still some of that's happening today. You know, we had the meltdown in the housing industry because of the way money was being loaned out. And so we have more rules in place now than we did at that time. But you had to have certain rules to set up a lending institution. And they had to meet you had to have a certain amount of money on reserve. And if you didn't do that, you couldn't open and operate. So most of those institutions that were all started and operated by African Americans met the federal guidelines to make it safe for an investment. They were insured by the federal government.
Well, Dr. White, how did things change when banks like Gateway came along?
Well, what it did, it made it possible for African Americans to get loans. You have to remember, Gateway can only loan out so much money. You know, there's a limit. You have an African American, large African American community, and Gateway is a small bank. So you loan to your limit, then you still have individuals had to go to white institutions. And then that's where you run into trouble. But still, Gateway had an important indent in the African American community with those who were able to take advantage of their services.
And for those who weren't?
they were left to the predatory lenders.
There were probably more of those who were left.
There were more of those who were left, right. You had a large number of individuals. And when you got ready to talk about buying a home, you were able to only get financing from those institutions if you purchased a home in a certain area, because there was steering going on. We'll steer you over here. You may not be able to go to this other neighborhood. And when after World War II, when the government provided loans for housing, many of those loans were not available to African Americans. And that's why you had a lot of segregated housing in North County. It began to change after 1948, after the Shelley versus Kramer decision, which said housing had to open up.
But prior to that, some of the powers that be in the banking industry were steering members of the African American community to certain areas.
In the African American community.
They could not go elsewhere.
You see, the building Gateway is torn down now. It's a lot with a big sign on it that says the credit union is on its way, and it's taken the name Gateway as being used as that market tool. And eventually, I think the area will recover. It's going to be a while, but I think if we don't have a story, a plaque on the outside, or a little paragraphs and brochures and flyers, it has no meaning. It's a good symbolic gesture at this point, but unless we keep the story alive, it has no meaning 10, 15 years from now.
That's what we're doing here, aren't we?
Most people have no idea what history is. They don't know how we got to this point where we are now, and they take it for granted. Freedom is frosting on somebody else's cake unless you know how to bake. That's what Langston Hughes stated years ago.
In the new bank, St. Louis Community Credit Union is going to have brochures and a plaque and detailed information outlining the history of that property, its relationship with Gateway, the former facility known as Gateway.
So we have to keep history alive to make sure we love it. People sacrifice for it, and we need to be willing to die for it. Many times we say, we got what we wanted, but we lost what we had. We got a broader opportunity to be in a larger institution, but we did lose the bank that was ours, that made it available for us to do a lot of things we are fortunate to preserve and have today. And so I think that's an important feature we have to always remember. And that's the same thing with our communities. Many of our communities say we like a better community, but in the community I grew up in, everyone knew each other and they supported each other. And that has been disappeared with integration.
Gateway Bank was actually one of the first banks that I started at back in 1990. I had attended a teller training school, and Gateway gave me an opportunity as a part-time teller. I started there and moved my way up into many different roles of the bank. I went from part-time teller to I forgot what they call it, the vault teller, and then moved on my way up to be a supervisor. And my last position there when they switched over was customer service rep. So
how many positions did you hold?
Oh my God. Like I said, I started as a teller. I was a teller supervisor. I went on to be customer service representative. I went from there to become the branch manager when they opened up another facility. Left there, worked upstairs in the behind the scenes department, as they call it. That was like the depository, and working upstairs in the loan department. And then I ended up back downstairs in customer service. So I kind of made my rounds within Gateway Bank to learn many different positions.
So Dolores, you moved a lot of money in.
Yes. Yes, I did.
Tell me about that. What kind of security measures were in place when that happened?
Well, we had a lot of most of the money that I moved was in the vault. So we had a lot of security where they bring the money in. We had security there at our facility. So when they brought it in, the security measures that we took is we dual controlled a lot of the money that came in. So we counted it under dual control. So we'll know that everything was there. And our vault was pretty much secured under dual control as well. So 2 people were there to count, make sure the money was there. 2 people pretty much counted the vault and make sure money was that went in and went out. It was dual control and signed by 2 different people.
So it sounds like things were in order as far as
Things were very much in order. Yes.
that's not something that can be taken lightly at a bank.
No.
Okay. What are some of your personal experiences at Gateway Bank? Dolores, do you have a particular story or 2 that you'd be willing to share with us?
I do, and it's funny. I can't remember this one lady's name, and I was talking with Larissa about it today. She was 102 years old. Well, she had gotten to be 102 years old, but she was one of our members. She always spoke about, I was here when the bank was open in 1965, and she had gotten to be 102 years old, and she never changed banks. Although her family moved her away when she got too old to take care of herself, she had her family member to bring her back to Gateway, and she always kept us laughing. And when she come in, we knew we were going to have a great day because she keep us laughing and making a joke about the security officer, how she's going to be his girlfriend. So, that was one of my greatest experience. I did have another one, young lady by the name of Miss Akehart. She became one of my members that took me on as her daughter. She never had a daughter. So she's like, you're my daughter. So she took me on as her daughter. So those were great experiences for me, when people get to know you and you get to know them, and they take you on like that. So it's a great feeling.
Kind of personal relationships.
Personal relationships.
I'm just saying that it sounds like those were
Yeah, they were.
relationships.
Yeah, they
that
were.
developed there.
They were, and they still are. Today, I still talk with Miss Akehart today. So, and many others that come into the St. Louis Community Facility.
Well, boy, Dolores, if you came on board in 1990, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's a completely different world than what we're hearing so much about of the 60s.
Yes, it is. Completely different.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
How
It's
so?
completely. Technology plays a big part. It's a little bit convenient now. It's a little better. Manual was good. That's what I always call it, between manual and technology from 1990 to now. I really wish that some of it was still in a manual world, though, because as far as the bank, is concerned, when working with, employees, because they'll get to see both sides and see how it works and see how we've come from this to this convenient, everything is quick and fast now. So, but yeah, it's very different.
What's different about, or what's better about manual?
Better about manual is because when the computers are not working, we know how to still keep things going.
When the computers are not working, nothing's working.
When computers not working now, nothing's working. We're shut down. Or I should say, if you don't know how to do manual, we're shut down. If you were in the manual world, you kind of say, no, we can do this, come on, we can still kind of keep some of this going. So I think.
Because you know that.
I know.
What about, Dolores, what about the cultural environment? Do you have any idea how it differed in 1990 from, say, 1960? Did you hear stories about what went on at Gateway National back 30 years prior?
I did hear some stories from the 60s when it started back then. It seemed like things were, I came at the peak part of, as far as manual things and how things were ran. It was a lot of paperwork, a lot of things like that. So as far as that is concerned, it didn't seem like it was much different than when I came on, because I took on some of the paperwork. But I don't know, some of the stories seem to be the same, and it seemed like I came in the middle of when it was manual, and then all of a sudden it's like, bam, we switched to technology not too many years later. It just seemed quick, but it was pretty much the same.
Do you have a sense, Dolores, of the role that Gateway National Bank played in the community?
Gateway Bank, I think, played a great role in the community as far as it being the only black bank, as they say. They always say it was the only black bank in St. Louis area. And then to be in a predominantly black community, I think it played a great role. A lot of our elderly people didn't have people to get them to the bank when I started. So it was good for them and good for them to get up and go, or either if they needed things, the bank cared for their members so much that sometimes we went to them. So I think it played a great role in that community over there as far as those members are concerned. And now they've gotten their family members involved. So a lot of them are my age, I should say, and they can come up and, they like the bank being there because it was convenient for them.
Where were you? You started in 90. How long were you there?
Ooh, I worked for Gateway about 18 or 19 years, but I was like off and on. I left, came back, and then, part-time, full-time, so I was back and forth.
So where were you when it was announced the bank was going to close?
I was at Gateway when they announced the bank. I was back at Gateway from 2001 on to the bank closed.
What'd you think then when you heard that?
Oh my God, I was like, okay, well, I kind of knew because I watched and I paid attention to the clientele, the people that were coming into the bank. We didn't have the long lines like we used to. We used to have long lines wrapped around. And then from me working upstairs in the different departments, I kind of watched the Capitol, the bank, and paid attention to how that worked. So kind of like, oh, we don't look too good. But I was shocked really when they were going to close because usually we come back. Gateway we'll go down, but we always come back. So that what made me surprised. I'm like, no, this is not the end. So.
But fewer customers and less capital, huh?
Yep. Fewer customers, less capital, loans, failing loans and things like that. So.
And you have branched out.
Yes.
Where are you now?
I am at St. Louis Community Credit Union.
I've heard of them.
Yes.
What about that? How did you come to your present job as your assistant branch manager at St. Louis Community Credit Union?
I was really excited to hear that they were going to purchase the facility and actually build another facility there. And then not only that, they were taking some of the workers there with them. Being said that is because I, like to, when I see good people, I try to bring them to the bank. Larissa's one of them that I used to work with at a part-time job. And I saw how she had her children and I'm like, why don't you work for the bank? It's good hours. You can be home with your kids, And I brought Larissa on. So it's kind of sad when you bring somebody to the bank and they've been there all those years and all of a sudden it's shut down and, So I was real excited about that.
And you have good reason to know the people at St. Louis Community Credit Union.
Yes, I have.
In light of that, are you glad to know that they're the ones who have taken this over, if you will?
Yes, I am. I am very glad to know that because St. Louis Community offers a lot. And that was some of the things that, we tried to get Gateway to do. Gateway Bank has a lot of good investments and everything for all different walks of life, I should say. So even from teenagers on up to adults, they help a lot of people. And I really, sometimes think about it, I say, I could have spent my 18 years at St. Louis Community. But I'm really proud that they took it over and going to build a facility there.
And now they're even keeping Gateway alive, if you will, in name.
Yes, I heard that they were going to throw us in there and keep our name. So that's really exciting because a lot of the members came over from Gateway to St. Louis Community because of that reason, too, that they found out they were going to build another facility there and, they're real excited about it. So, yeah.
Well, Dolores, in light of that, what do you think St. Louis Community Credit Union's presence means to the community with its investment or with keeping the name of Gateway Bank alive?
Well, I think their presence will be very welcome because a lot of, like I said, the members have flocked over to a lot of the St. Louis community facilities. And they've been with them for as long as we have been there, which, they kind of like it. They like that we're there because they can call us and find out where we are and ask us questions when things are going a certain way. So I think their presence will be welcome.
I began working at Gateway 2007 to 2012. Started off as a full-time teller and then eventually became the teller supervisor. You know, Gateway was started in the 60s. This is now 2015, so it's way more advanced, better offers, better programs for that matter than it was in the 60s. So yes, I think that it will be maybe better than Gateway.
We are truly in a completely different era.
Yeah, we are.
In light of that, Larissa, what do you think St. Louis Community Credit Union's presence will mean with its investment in Gateway?
I think the presence will mean a lot to the community. I still see account holders who had accounts at Gateway, and they look for me and Dolores. And where you guys at? Where you guys at? When they're going to open the facility? Are you guys going to come back to this location? So they're looking for it. They're wanting it because they know that it will be a good thing for the community and for them as personally as well.
So what about that? Are you going to go with the name? Or are you going to be back at that location?
Unfortunately, I will not be back at that location, but the people that we served at Gateway really trusted our judgment as employees and as working in the financial institution. So they trust us, and if we say, hey, it's good, it's okay, you'll be okay, then they will go ahead and trust in St. Louis community, because a lot of our account holders at Gateway did follow and cross over to St. Louis community because we advised them to.
Yeah. You ladies are the face of the bank.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but we did play a good part in building relationships and trusting with our account holders. We did do that.
So what else? Anything else I haven't touched upon here that you thought was relevant?
I just think that now today, from Gateway to St. Louis community, now we are crossing lines of technology. So I think that it's good that that neighborhood or that community will get some more advancement and some things that Gateway didn't offer. And as far as like technology, sometimes you can keep the old with the new instead of just totally erasing the old for the new. So I think that's a good thing.
Lisa, what about this? Your father accomplished so many things in his lifetime. Tell us about what you learned growing up and about his role as Gateway Bank's co-founder and chairman emeritus.
Well, you know, Dad was very dedicated to the African American community, and he just had a passion for serving the community, and he and the other co-founders and investors knew there needed to be a financial institution in the community to serve the African American community. At that time, there were none, and they were very, very courageous in doing so, especially during the 60s and the mid-60s. So, as I said, Dad was very committed to the bank. Even in his final days, Dad was bedridden, and he would take conference calls and attend the board meetings by phone. So, and he did that up until his death.
Now, I understand you are a shareholder of Gateway National Bank. Tell us a bit about how you came to be involved with Gateway and how this relationship evolved over the years.
I came to be involved with Gateway after I had heard about it. Dr. Jerome Williams Sr. was a good friend of mine. And he was telling me about the bank and what it all hoped to do, what their aspirations were, this type of thing. I was not one of the original shareholders. I came later after I moved all of my business banking to Gateway. And Dr. Williams wanted to know, would I be interested in becoming an investor in the bank? And I said, I'll think about it. I became an investor. I became the second largest shareholder of the bank. And at one point, I served as vice chairman of the bank. And I was very, very proud to be a part of the banking. Very disappointed that the bank did not do everything that we had hoped that it would do. And I was somewhat distraught after I heard that the bank was not succeeding big time. So upon hearing that the bank was going to close, I said a prayer and said, let's do it. And that's how we came to, at the request of the OCC, the bank was closed.
Closed on a prayer.
On a prayer, but we were fortunate in that we found a buyer for the bank. There was a group that wanted to buy, basically they needed our charter. And so they actually bought the bank from us. So the bank was definitely a viable bank as we left it.
Now, you mentioned prior to all this, you moved your business dealings there. Why did you do that?
I did that because I wanted to be a part of the only minority bank in the state of Missouri. Very much interested in helping all that I could. And my business was doing quite well at that time. We moved all personal accounts and all business accounts to Gateway.
Mr. Little, were there individuals at the bank whose roles or interactions with you as a shareholder are especially meaningful?
Well, with all of the shareholders, Dr. Jerome Williams Sr., Clifton Gates, Charles Stewart, all of these people were very much interested in trying to set up a bank that would cater to our community. We were having some difficulty doing business with the banking institutions of St. Louis. And so we felt like, hey, let's do it ourselves. And that was the entire idea. This was right in the middle of the civil rights movement, and we were very much a part of that. I was not here in St. Louis when it started. I came to St. Louis from Detroit, Michigan, and was very instrumental in helping the bank. There were times when it was necessary to provide additional capital for the bank. I was very pleased to be able to do that. And we were hoping that we would be long-lived. Unfortunately, things were not going well. We became the bank of last resource to a certain degree for many people. And at one point, we had too many loans that were not doing well. And that was when we found the buyer for the bank, and we exited at that point.
Aside of doing business with Gateway, what was it like back then for an African American to try to establish a loan or a banking relationship in St. Louis?
It was difficult. It was difficult. I was not involved with the marches that took place with other banking institutions because they did not hire us, they did not make services available to us. And so for that reason, we felt it would be very nice if we could provide our own services by starting our own bank. And as I said, I was not here when the bank was started. That was a group of doctors, per se, with Cliff Gates, who was the owner of Landmark Distributing Company. But Chuck Stewart, CPA, they were all involved in helping to make Gateway National Bank possible. I was very pleased to be able to be a contributor to those efforts. And we did succeed in that sense. We invited many, many people from St. Louis to invest in the bank. Not a big investment, it was not necessary. If you could buy 1 or 2 or 10 shares of stock, that was adequate at that time. And many people did. Unfortunately, we were not able to provide for them great dividends, but we do appreciate their efforts.
What personally, Mr. Little, was of greatest importance to you about Gateway and its role in the local community?
doing for oneself was the most important thing to me. I'd been involved in the civil rights movement in Detroit, Michigan. Very proud to say that I had the honor of walking down Woodward Avenue with Dr. Martin Luther King. Civil rights was just very important to me and the other board members. And so to have an opportunity to be involved with the bank, like I said, there was no other bank, federally chartered bank in the state of Missouri. And so given this opportunity to be an investor in the bank, I never one day regretted it, even though we did not do as well as we had hoped to do.
You know, when you heard that the bank would close, were you surprised?
No, I was not. I was not surprised at all. Now, keep in mind that the bank had been bought at that time when it was going to close. The bank had been bought by another party, and while I had a lot of sympathy for them, they were attempting to do what we were attempting to do, and it just was not feasible at that time. I think today is a new day. Things are different now. You have younger people, you have better educated people coming along, and I think that today we would have been a success.
Had you heard of St. Louis Community Credit Union?
No, I had not. That was new to me. I was speaking with Dr. Williams, the son of Dr. Williams Sr., who is Dr. Jerome Williams Jr., and he asked me if I was aware. When I went into his office, I noticed across the street where the bank used to be, and this was my first time seeing that the old bank building was being demolished. And he kind of informed me as to who had bought the rights to the bank, had bought the property, and I wished them nothing but the best.
What were your impressions upon seeing that building torn down?
Well, I pretty much extrapolated the fact that someone was doing some building there with a new building. I did not know who it was or what entity they were planning on putting there. And when I heard about the credit union, I said, well, great. I also heard that they were going to name their latest branch after Gateway.
What do you think of that?
I was very pleased. I was very pleased and very proud that the Gateway name in financial institutions, that the Gateway name was going to live on. And certainly I'm hopeful that they will be very, very successful at that location.
And again, does that feel like a bit of a tribute to Gateway, the fact that they're carrying on with that name?
I do feel that it's a tribute to Gateway, and I think that there are those around today that realize what we were trying to accomplish at that time.
Finally, Mr. Little, what does St. Louis Community Credit Union's presence mean to the community with the investment in Gateway Bank?
The idea that we could be providing these services for our own community, that's one of the things that I think that many of us are still concerned with. And to whatever extent we're able to do that, I think we will, I think we should.
You know, Mr. Little, these goings on with Gateway and St. Louis Community Credit Union, this is no small part of St. Louis history we're talking about here.
I think you're right. I think that it's going to be a big part of St. Louis history. Looking back upon the problems that we had getting banking services, adequate banking services, back when the bank was first started, that's unthinkable today. And I'm very pleased that those days have passed, those times are gone.
Those are good changes.
Good changes, without a doubt. There's always room for progress, and those changes are part of the progress that we want to see in St. Louis throughout the banking industry and other industries.
Mr. Little, what else? What else have I not touched upon here that you thought might be relevant?
Well, I think you've touched upon some important factors. All of us who are parts of the community, we need to realize that sometimes you get things done by doing them yourself. and regardless as to what the business happens to be. I'm very pleased to see more young people starting out on an entrepreneurship route. It makes me feel good. When we first started the bank, we had problems attracting the younger generation. But I think that's all past now. And I think that the younger people coming along today, they'll be very supportive.
Initially, I was there for 16 years, from 1985 to 2001. And I left in 2001, came back in 2009, and left again after Central Bank took over, and we got them through the conversion in 2012.
Why'd you leave?
Which time?
Pick one.
Well, the first time, I lived in Imperial, Missouri. I moved to Imperial, Missouri. I initially lived in the city, moved to Imperial, and a job offer came up that was 3 miles from my home. And so that's why I left in 2001. Then I came back in, I think it was 2009. A gentleman I had worked with prior became president of Gateway Bank. I worked again as senior vice president of operations. And I was there when the bank failed. And then stayed for about 2 years to help Central Bank of Kansas City get acclimated and worked on the conversion from our system to their system.
Boy, tell me about the failure. What was that atmosphere like?
Sad, very, very sad. The FDIC was in for they sent one person that was there for about a week, so I knew something was going to happen, and I assumed it was failing because I was in charge of bookkeeping, and I knew, what was happening with the money situation. And I always worked very closely with the bank examiners because compliance was, operations compliance was one of my responsibilities. So, it was pretty clear what was going to happen. We just didn't know exactly what day until the day it happened. So.
Compliance was not optional.
No, oh no. That was one of my many responsibilities. I think that's why I stayed there so long, because I had worked at 2 large banks, and you kind of get acclimated into one area. When I came to Gateway in 1985, it had way too many employees for the size of the bank. As people left, I was given their responsibility as management left. So in the end, I was responsible and managed everything except the loan department. And I guess that's why I always stayed, because it was always such a challenge. Had I been given all that responsibility initially, I probably would have failed, but I got it gradually as people left and was able to learn that aspect of the bank before the next responsibility came along. So it was always a challenge and always very interesting.
Barbara, can you convey in layman's terms that are not bank specific what happened at the end?
There was a lot of bad loans, 1 to 4 family residential loans, and people were making loans to improve the property and rent it out or sell it, and the money was given to these lenders, but the property was not updated. It was abandoned. Some property that was updated and we repossessed had been stripped before we got the keys to the property, or before we got access back. So it was, I would have to say the failure was in 1 to 4 family properties.
Well, Barbara, what are some of your personal best experiences at Gateway? Do you have a story or two in particular you'd like to share with us?
When we finally got an ATM, to other banks that is not a big deal. We were probably 10 years behind other banks. So when we got our first ATM, that was a big deal to us.
So what was of greatest importance to you regarding Gateway and its role in the community?
Customer service, and we excelled at customer service.
You didn't hesitate there at all?
Nope. We had a lot of older customers, and they would come in and sit down at the customer service desk, give us a list of what bills they had to pay, and we would go up to the teller line and get the money orders that they needed, and bring them back and help them fill them out and address their envelopes. I mean, that is really above and beyond anything you would expect from any bank. And we didn't have anything else to offer. You know, like we didn't have online bill payment or online banking or any of the other frills that the other banks had, but we had customer service down pat. We did an excellent job with that.
Well, people could bring their bills in and get them paid. You didn't need online bill paying.
No, no, and you know, and there were certain customers that every month you knew when they were coming, and you'd be ready for them. And if our customers walked into our bank, they were greeted by their name. And I think, you know, that's why we had a really dedicated customer base, because it's like walking into Cheers. Everybody knows your name and you know, speaks to you and says hello and, you know, ask how the kids are doing. So, yeah, I think that was our niche.
When you heard the bank was going to close, were you surprised?
Not sitting from where I was sitting, I was not.
You knew.
Pretty much, yeah.
You knew the numbers.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, I worked very closely with the examiners, so you could kind of read between the lines.
How'd you feel about that?
I was sad. I was very sad, and there just wasn't anything I could do. I mean, you know, it was just hopeless at that point. Every time they came in to do an examination, the numbers got worse and worse and worse because we had to continually decrease our assets because the properties weren't worth what we had them on the books for, and we had to bring their value down, and so it was pretty ugly.
Have you heard of St. Louis Community Credit Union?
I have. I understand they bought the building where Gateway is, and they're tearing it down and going to start from scratch, which needs to be done. I mean, that's a good move. That building was in pretty bad shape.
So what do you think about that whole relationship?
Well, you know, when I heard that they were going to honor Gateway in the process, I thought that was pretty amazing. You know, they don't have to do that, but I think it's pretty noble of them.
Honor them by bearing their name.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So Gateway lives on.
Right.
But I mean, is the notion that the name lives on, is that important?
I think it is. I think it is because, like I said, we didn't have much to offer in the way of electronics like the other banks did, but our customers knew us and we knew them. I think the beginning of the bank is important, you know, that needs to be known about the gentleman that got the bank started with the petitions and gathering up the money, finding the stockholders. You know, there was a lot of pride in the neighborhood and the investors, and I can't recall the exact story that was passed down to me, but I'm sure someone does, probably Lisa Gates, because her father was one of the founders, and I'm sure she has the entire story, front to back.
Is that who you mean, though, when you say the gentleman?
Well, Clifton Gates was one of them.
Right.
And there was Dr. Williams, George Montgomery. It's hard to remember everybody.
But that group, though.
Yeah.
Well, my uncle